was a lot of things happening at that particular moment in time, but it really just hit you in the face right away when I first arrived in Palestine. The sort of the smells, and somebody who was raised Christian, I was raised Christian and taught about, the Holy Land and, all these things. It was completely alienated from me. I didn't feel like it was a religious experience in that way in my sort of Christian upbringing. And I remember walking through the holy city and seeing that like most of the people who were there, or a good majority of the people who were there, were tourists. Most of them were from the United States. Many of them were from parts of the country where they probably don't even acknowledge indigenous people exist. And it was so such a profound kind of shift in my thinking. I always knew about Palestine. I started reading the Electronic Intifada when I was in college and undergraduate, because I was trying to follow what was going on with the Intifada, and I felt like the representations in the mainstream media were very distorted. And so Palestine, I didn't need to go to Palestine to be in solidarity. For me, has always been a part of how I understood the rest of the world, and when going to see how people live under this military occupation, where there's constant checkpoints, freedom of movement is completely limited. It was so shocking to me because our territories of the Ocheti Shakoi are so expansive. They're so large. They take up, at least, 4 or 5 states in the United States, and even up into parts of what is now Canada. And this area of land is about the size of the state of New Jersey, right? And you can wake up in the morning, and this was the most kind of, I guess, nightmarish thing for me, was you could wake up in the morning and smell the sea breeze blow in the morning, and realize that the people who were living in Ramallah or the West Bank couldn't actually access the sea. They could smell the sea, right? So freedom was just over, just through that checkpoint and just over those hills, right? And that to me was such a profound sort of experience. And I think thinking back to our own history as Ocheti Shakoi people, and the place I currently live, which is Minnesota Makoche, or so-called Minnesota, the immense amount of violence, the immense amount of genocide that was required to create the state of Minnesota, where there are still to this day removal laws that actually banish and prohibit Dakota people from existing in that state, are so similar. Like, Israel takes the model from Minnesota. They want to become Minnesota. They want to annihilate and completely remove Palestinians. And if you go back in time in 1862 and you read the newspaper reports, the ways that Dakota people were characterized as savage, barbarians, as what we would call the T word today, that their lands were ever diminishing. They were confined to a narrow strip, much like the Gaza Strip. I think it's almost, ours was just a little bit bigger, but it was meant to starve them out. It was meant to force them into submission, to the point where they trespassed across those reservation borders and took action against the very people who stole their land. And how to this day, 2023, they are still not forgiven for their actions of resistance to exact life for themselves, right? That's how much hate, that's how much effort has gone into the disappearance of Dakota people and their annihilation within the context of Minnesota. And so when Leanne reached out for this particular letter, I was watching the news and watching how every single organization, or many of the main organizations, many of the mainstream media, was making Palestinians, if they were allowed to speak at all, ritualistically condemn things that they were not responsible for. And there was no accountability whatsoever on the state of Israel for the 75 plus years of terrorism, of genocide, ethnic cleansing, displacement, whatever we want to call it, settler colonialism. And never an ask of the Zionists to engage in their project nonviolently because we know the only language they speak is violence.